Get over more out of it. My sister just got back from Hawaii. She's definitely. Yeah. They have a small person.
Thanks everybody for coming. About one more minute tonight and we'll get started. Sarah, good to go on your side? Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Larger room than normal, feels a little too spacious for the crowd. It feels like you're a long ways away from me tonight, but it is 6 o'clock, so I will call to order the special meeting of Thursday, May 16th, 2024. Please join me for a flag salute.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Present.
Mr. Mosher,
Here.
Mr. Pike,
Here.
Mr. Yestad,
Here.
Ms. Carlson,
Here.
and Mr. Celine.
Here.
Mr. Christensen is absent this evening.
Thank you. Any correspondence or agenda changes? I do have one piece of correspondence I have received. Wanted to inform the assembly and the public that our attorney candidate, Anne Marie, has pulled out of the race for our municipal attorney. She talked with her family and ultimately reached a conclusion that a move to Sitka right now was not in her favor. So was unable to continue forward in our recruitment process. So we're kind of back to the drawing board at this point, and we'll continue to recruit for a municipal attorney. So that'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Hello, my name is Leah Mason, and I'm here to talk about things that are not on the agenda. Hard things. Support for entrepreneurs who want to do something that serves the community directly, year round, to do things that create community and foster the food web that has sustained human communities in this place for centuries. Rational discussions of sustainable local economies, one that is not hiking up its skirt to attract passing sailors. The limited time that we have to develop such an economy and the resources that will be required to do so, the changes that will be made. These are not on the agenda, so I'm talking about them. The limited time that industries and communities like ours that rely on fossil fuels have to make their peace with the loss of global travel and the transportation of goods. Succession planning, another thing that's not on the agenda. I hope to hear more of them outside of this kind of discussion.
Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening?
Good evening. My name is Nalani James, and I am a private citizen and the owner of Bayside Tours. Thanks for being here today. I'd like to talk about something possibly on the agenda regarding safety. As a private citizen and a tour operator, I would like to see signage throughout Sitka, downtown, Sawmill Creek, that discourages people crossing the street without using a crosswalk. Within a community of, as you have seen, 2024 new drivers, you have new graduates that are distracted, looking at their phones. You have an aging community that has a slower response time to reacting. You have people crossing the street more often than not with motorized scooters, non-motorized wheelchairs, crutches, braces, foot braces. And one would think, why would you cross the street in this fashion, considering that you were already in a position where your health is already jeopardized? So I think that would influence people to welcome tourism a lot more, because as a tour operator and a private citizen, it is a distraction, it's disruptive, and I wouldn't think anywhere anyone would come into a town and behave lawlessly. I think the barricades encourage people to behave and cross in any manner that they please. I had a separate tour operator inform me last year that a person bumped into their vehicle. And I said, explain what you're telling me. You hit someone? And they said, no, a person bumped into my vehicle as I was driving. Fortunately, it wasn't the other way around. So people are crossing across the bridge, taking their bikes, any sense of mode of transportation without any care or any means of understanding that even though you don't live here and you're here for maybe 8 or even 12 hours, you do need to use the crosswalk. Thank you.
Anyone else under persons to be heard this evening? Items not on the agenda? Seeing none, that'll bring us to new business. So tonight we're gathered to hear a presentation of the Tourism Task Force final recommendations. The Assembly received a copy of that as soon as it was voted on, so I hope everyone's had the time to look through it. Tonight we'll have a presentation from the chair, Jim Mitchner, and we'll go listen to the process they went through. And then tonight, we do have the opportunity to accept the Tourism Task Force recommendations and then start working on them, get a process going where we start an action plan and get some staff involved, and then the Assembly can get involved as well on items that they deem that they want to tackle. So that'll be later in the meeting, but we'll have an opportunity for a robust discussion about that part after the presentation as well. So tonight, I understand Amy has a couple things to say about the process, and then Jim will have the presentation. So please welcome both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amy Ainsley, Planning and Community Development Director. Before I turn things over to Jim, I wanted to share something with the Assembly. I put this in a memo that I handed out as well, and there's copies in the back of the room as well. And again, in really just kind of the spirit of transparency, I wanted to make sure that this was flagged for you. Sorry, it is already open. So in reviewing some of the documentation for our meeting tonight, I found an error that I wanted to be very clear about. When the rest of the task force has an opportunity to perhaps answer questions from the Assembly after Jim's presentation, I'm happy to hear from them as well about their thoughts on this as well. But I actually just found this today and wrote this up this afternoon, so that's why it was not provided to you with more notice, so I apologize for that. But this is regarding some of the analysis that was done on trying to project sales tax or trying to better understand the relationship between sales tax and cruise ship passenger numbers. And so in the December 7th town hall meeting, I attempted to kind of look at that more mathematically and to create a model that would help us better understand what exactly that relationship is. Per the methodology, I chose to use 2021 as a baseline year because that's a year that we had very strong independent travel, but very weak cruise travel. And so that was one of the better ways to try and parse out how much sales tax comes from cruise ship passengers versus independent travelers. I found that error in the calculation that I had inadvertently, while meaning to put the 2021 as the baseline, had accidentally referenced 2020. And so the relationship between sales tax and cruise ship passengers is not quite as clear cut as I had originally thought because of this calculation error. And so this is kind of an example that shows when we use the 2020 numbers that, you know, the model pretty closely fits in terms of being able to predict if we have X number of cruise ship passengers, we'll have this amount of sales tax revenue per head. When using the 2021 results, it was actually a lot more kind of fragmented, and there's kind of this interesting spike in the 2022 numbers that arose by fixing that calculation. And so that means that the prediction line doesn't fit the actual data quite as well. And so this is also a representation of how some of the numbers have changed based on the correction in this calculation. So my opinion is that this was, you know, the reason that we were kind of talking about this was more out of public interest to better understand this relationship between sales tax and cruise passengers, and that this data didn't directly inform any of the recommendations. It's referenced as a finding on page 7. So my recommendation is that the bullet point that describes the relationship just be removed altogether, and that the memo that I wrote for you explaining this calculation error and the fix for it be included as another appendices to the document to help document that this error was found and was, you know, was corrected, and also shows that, you know, the previous version had that bullet point that would then be struck.
Thank you for that clarification, Amy, and I thank you for bringing up the corrected results when you found it. Thank you for that. And did you have anything else, or?
That is everything I want to share. I am now going to turn things over to Jim to give you more of the overview, and I will just be up here for technical support.
Okay, you say, where's my magic button? But
And now, Jim, now you have the hard job.
very good, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Members of the Assembly, thank you very much for having us here this evening to present the recommendations of the Tourism Task Force to you and be available to answer any questions or hopefully give you insight if there's something you'd like more information on from myself or other members that are here tonight. I was appointed to represent the downtown business corridor. It was my position on the task force, and throughout the process became the chair after Phyllis Hackett had to step down. Before we move on, I'd like to recognize the other members of the task force that put in a lot of hours and a lot of time on this. And I think earnestly, we're trying to get the pulse of the town and do good work for all the members of our community. Rich McClear was vice chair, community at large. Camille Ferguson was representing the Sitka tribe. Scott Wagner from Ports and Harbors. Barbara Bingham was part of the Sustainability Commission and brought in her thoughts on this. Jeremy Plank for Tours and Attractions. Cambria Holmes, Business in General, Chris McGraw, Ryan Gluth. And then our ex officios, Rachel Roy with Visit Sitka, and Amy Ainsley, who, a side note, was absolutely crucial for the work we did. Thank you, Amy. Jessica Earnshaw, also for the city, was absolutely incredible to work with us. And then JJ Carlson and Chris, thank you so much for giving us guidance and being available to bounce stuff off of. And of course, Phyllis Hackett, who had to step down, and Lori Boysa, who also left. So thank you to those people. So we were tasked with 5 directives, and you see them on the board up there, and really aimed at how the city can transition into a long-term management for tourism. And as you've had the report for a couple of weeks, I hope you had time to look at it and kind of weed through it and see if you had any questions. And so we can kind of flesh it out a little bit more if there's anything you'd like. But as far as major takeaways that I think to bring to the public and to you, we spent a lot of time talking about whether the city, what the city could or cannot control. And that was really meaningful to spend that time on that. It was tedious and arduous and hard to come up with consensus on that. And there's still contention in the city about it. But as a task force, we really kind of focused on what's known to be within the city's control, rather than think about, you know, the big what ifs or maybes. What can we control? What do we have control over? And managing tourism really has 2 parts. You can manage the numbers and you can manage the effects. And so there's still unknowns about managing numbers. I'm sure you all know about thoughts in the community and potential things on the horizon with that, but there are some steps we recommend taking. Additionally, there's lots of action the city can do to manage the effects of large-scale tourism. The focus should be on long lead actions that need to be started now to see success over the next several years. As we have gone through this process for the last almost year, it was important. I'm glad we did it, and I think we got a lot of good information out of it. But we need to take action sooner rather than later and not kick the can down the road. And I think that for the community, that's going to be critical to get some actionable items out there and to start getting our handle on this thing. And immediate actions, pardon me, which I was just expressing, so we can really kind of let the community know that we're working on this, and not just working on it, but providing something. So next, as far as level of tourism, that's the first directive, and it was the most contentious. It's what the town halls were about primarily. There were other issues of it that was all involved, but this really got the focus of what the town was really worried about and concerned about. And the town halls brought out that it was a polarizing issue. What we found, and this has a lot to do with participation of residents, we seem to find both sides, the far edge of each side, being very vocal about it, as often is, and not hearing a whole bunch from the middle. Right or wrong, I viewed my job on the task force as not expressing my personal opinions, but to try and find that middle ground, to try and find the average of the far left and the far right on this issue, and to try and find consensus with it. It was challenging, but I think we got some real headway about what the middle is. So the task force was divided on making final recommendations under this directive. We weren't able to say, here's the number we should go for. It just was really too much to hammer down. The one thing I can say going through this process was that an annual limit is kind of just a non-starter. There's a bunch of reasons why that's problematic. And if we do look towards making some sort of numerical limit on large ship travel and large ship visitors, daily seems to be the best way to go about it. We have more control over it, and it avoids a lot of pitfalls that come up with an annual limit that could be problematic. The numbers that we ended up recommending were higher than what many in the community wish to see, to not go far enough to reduce cruise visitation. We understand that. Again, we're trying to find the middle ground and also trying to look at what potential problems could be legally for the city at the other end too. And so trying to come up with a solution that works the best as we can for the community. Locking into a number through a binding agreement based on the data available was what we decided was the best thing we could do as a body and as a city. A memorandum of agreement, while not legally binding, is something where everyone comes to the table and we make this agreement. It can be changed over time. It's not set in stone. We can adapt, but what it would allow us to do with an MOU is to try to get the scheduling of these ships under control and with some control on our end sooner than any other method we could find. By doing that, the cruise line agencies, or CLIA, does the scheduling for these boats. And if we have an MOU with that organization, then we can really figure out how to manage and flatten the curve, which has been talked about, and to get some control over the numbers. With our recommendations that you saw in the report, we didn't end up with an absolute, hard and fast, what we recommend, but really the crux of it is this, that if the cruise line terminal out there is bringing in one large Neo-Panamax ship 2 to 3 times a week, and on those days they're in another large ship, that number comes out to be roughly 6,200 people in town. Any number larger than that is because we're allowing those boats to anchor and lighter to our facilities. So it's going to fall upon you as the assembly to figure out how to work with that. And from my perspective, what I saw was we either say the cap is what the dock provides out the road, and that's our top, or we say unlimited, we can anchor as many boats as want to come in plus the dock, or the middle ground, if people are looking for the middle ground, would be something like Vessels under 900 passengers can lighter in, even if there's two large boats out at the dock. And any vessel larger than 900 passengers could lighter if their arrival doesn't bring the number higher than if there were two large vessels at the dock. Does that make sense? So that's kind of, our discussion kind of went around those ideas. That's kind of the three kind of versions we came up with as far as how to deal with that if you choose to approach an MOU with CLIA and the cruise lines. Ultimately, the vote in favor of the recommendations on the directive were based on the need to start working with the industry. If we don't, then 2026 is just around the corner and they're going to start scheduling those cruises. And without MOU, it's going to look just like this year. And with an MOU, we can get that for 2026, some control over the issue, because they really are the ones that set everything in motion. And for instance, like it was already earlier this year, we had what, 9,300 people on a day. And it's when the Wester Dam or one of the dam ships made a port call change. And that's what really bumped us up to those high numbers. If we had an MOU, that would have already been there, that it couldn't come in that day because the dock out the road already had a Neo-Panamax and already had a large ship. So that wouldn't have been a 9,000 person day. That would have been a 6,200 person day. That's what an MOU would have accomplished. Agreements do take time and the seasons are booked well in advance. So I really think that starting the conversation for an MOU would be in our best interest to do that. And remember that Juneau's on their third version. Doesn't mean we're stuck with the first one, but let's get one going so that we can at least avoid those big spikes that we have seen. The annual review cycle was also part of what we were looking at, and tourism will be an ongoing issue, as we all know. And a permanent tourism commission is something the task force felt was really, really necessary, that we get that codified and get the commission so they can carry forward the actions that are recommended by the tourism task force and the recommendations that you all come up with. And I think critically that would create the venue for public input. We heard from a lot of the public. Most of our meetings were work sessions, and that was very frustrating for the public, and I understand that. We were also a body of people that weren't used to working with Robert's Rules of Orders, and we had a lot of information to gather, and we were trying to be as efficient as possible. So I think that by not having the meetings be open for public discussion was productive and a disservice to the community at the same time. So I'm glad we got as much done because of what we did, but I think it left the public feeling like they didn't have as much of a voice as they deserve, and I agree with that. And having a commission would kind of solve both of those problems, to keep it on the radar and allow people to have their input be heard. And providing oversight for the annual review of city tourism and the TBMP program and more. There's going to be a lot as we go forward with these numbers and whatever they are, slightly more, slightly less of cruise ship visitors. There's a lot to work with. And so having that commission, I think, would be really good, especially working with the annual review process. The Tourism Best Management Practices, TBMP, we had several members of our commission that did a spectacular job putting this together. That program luckily was kind of boilerplated already by Juneau primarily and Ketchikan. And so there was a good head start to run on it. And then having the commission members work on tailoring it down to Sitka's needs was really good. Now, TBMP won't have any legal teeth to it. It's industry driven, but it is something that when industry gets involved in regulating themselves, we see better results. And so I'm really proud of the work that the members did on TBMP. And it really does encourage good behavior by our members of our community that are involved in tourism, as seen earlier with somebody concerned about public safety because they're involved in the industry. And this is a great place for those concerns to be heard, but not only heard, to be acted upon. So the primary action we've taken to determine the program administration needs to be kind of figured out and roll out with membership training, mentoring, and information. Sharing all, we need to be established and executing the organization with the capacity to manage the program. So finding the house for that is going to be the big challenge. Right now, Visit Sitka kind of is laid up to take the lead on that. And I think in the beginning, it's probably a great place to start because they are set up to really, really help with that and kind of have the infrastructure rolling. Maybe it needs to be split out in the future, but it'd be the easiest way to get that implemented quickly. The next slide we have, talking about land use and development. This is kind of interesting to me. On our final meeting we had and taking public comment, I really thought that this was going to be our recommendations and what we'd worked on were going to be fairly contentious, and they weren't. This one seemed fairly cut and dry as far as what I heard from the public and what we were presenting. So it has the most recommendations for two reasons. They address some of the more pressing concerns from the community in terms of effects they're experiencing from tourism, and land use regulations permitting and managing development are still squarely within the control of the city. So this is the place I feel that you as a board, as a political body, can make the most change that's important for the city and quickly. It can be done pretty easily. So taking action on these recommendations can and should be prioritized, I think. If you're looking for the low-hanging fruit, I think it hangs right here instead of some of the bigger long-term projects. Top concerns from the community. Boy, did we hear about e-bikes. There was a lot of talk about the e-bikes. And as we're now back in tourist season and I'm on the road, boy, am I noticing the e-bikes. So you've, instead of going through it piece by piece, you've heard our recommendations about regulating them as motor vehicles. I saw it again today, 4 people on the sidewalk on e-bikes. And that's in my opinion, not the task force, personal opinion, a problem. Impacts on recreational areas with e-bikes. We really did a fairly deep dive on this as far as what areas maybe can we regulate for e-bikes to be and where they cannot be. And one of the recommendations in there is to require renters of e-bikes to have GPS chips in them so we can figure out where they are. There was a lot of discussion on the task force about setting up geofencing, which if you're not familiar with it, you can set up an area where e-bike's not allowed. And if it goes into the area, the battery just turns off, whether it be through an app that the renter has or whether it be on the bike itself, that can be in. But we kind of backed off on that a bit to say, hey, let's look at maybe GPS tracking for a year and then gather all the data. Where are the high use areas? Where are the conflict areas? So we're starting out with really good data to go forward with that. Pedestrian safety, as I mentioned, I was surprised to find out that outside of the downtown corridor, it's legal to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk. I didn't know that. And so that's in your court to figure out if it should continue to be that way or if we need to adjust that. And then downtown improvements were also a huge discussion item, and working with how to deal with the traffic, how to deal with the jaywalking, which again is not illegal in the city of Sitka. We found out it's okay to jaywalk. And so that's not an infraction that can be ticketed. We talked about the pros and cons of enforcing jaywalking and the labor requirements for our police department to do so. And we got kind of stuck on that, especially since it seems like the largest problem area is right here behind us on Harbor Drive and it's DOT stuff. And so there's a lot of work to be done on that, but we ended up deciding as a commission that, or as a task force, that we not put a jaywalking ordinance on, that we will try and figure out how to work with DOT to get this working a little better, but have all the local community worrying about walking across Lincoln Street in October would be a little bit upsetting to the majority of the community. Additional concerns from the task force about land use and development policies. This one seemed very cut and dry to most of us. Zoning changes needed to address potential new and additional cruise docks in the future. looking through the maps of Sitka and the zoning of it. Currently in C2 properties and other properties, a conditional use permit is not required to put in an additional cruise dock. Of course, there'll be tideland permits and things like that, but putting a conditional use permit on docks that can handle a cruise ship in the future would at minimum give the public a chance to come forward and be part of the discussion for that. And there's a tremendous amount of land in the city that could have that opportunity. So strongly recommend some zoning changes to be able to, at a minimum, put conditional use permits on that. So it's not denying a landowner the use to use the land, but at least making a conditional use. And in the report is a little more detail about that, ways to go about it, whether it be a dock size or whether it's using for the vessels or not. And streamlining the permit administration. Throughout the different industries involved in tourism in this town, there's 6 different permits from different places that may need to be procured. And if we have a commission, that would be helpful, but also a city employee that's involved with tourism, getting that position. I know it's being bandied about, but to pull all those permits under one roof, or at minimum, one clearinghouse place where somebody could get all the information on all those permitting processes to make it easier for people to go forward would be great. And then also the alignment of our port facilities to all work together and be cohesive, especially when we look at fee structures and things like that, aligning GPIP and port and harbor policies and fees, and manage the effects of tourism at the industrial park. That there really start to be some clarity on that. We have GPIP out there. We've kind of got a pretty good idea of what the city would like it to be used for. And will that use be diluted if tourism starts to get a hold in that area and start to take over that area? What is our desired use for GPIP? And what needs to be codified to protect that use if that's the desire of the body to do so? And again, with the working with GPIP, tying up some smaller boats out there, plus lightering in the harbors, getting some consistency between those so that it's all the same, on the same page. Also land use and development. This one was an interesting one, an idea I brought up to the task force, and we had some good debate about it, which I always like a good solid debate. Vacancy tax for downtown businesses. One of my concerns, huge concern of mine, is that downtown Sitka never look like downtown Juneau, South Franklin Street, the downtown Sitka never look like Ketchikan or Skagway. We have a year-round business center in this town. We have businesses that are open year-round for our community, owned by community members, and that is near and dear to my heart, that we continue to do that. And I'm very concerned about businesses that are just focused on cruise ship tourism coming in seasonally and leasing spaces and then being shut down in the winter. And one of the ways to look into it is a vacancy tax. It can take many forms, as you probably read in the report, where we ended up with some discussion between the task force members was, one, the word tax, I think, scares a lot of people. It also has to go to a vote of the people, which is great. But whether or not it be an incentive or be something that's punitive. And so if you do look into the vacancy tax, I want to throw out some ideas, both sides, punitive and also incentivize. It could be through some property tax incentives for the landowners. If they keep properties occupied year round, that's a great incentive. I don't know if there's enough there. On the tax side, I just want to express this, since I have your undivided attention, which is a rare thing, that when I was bringing forward this idea, the idea was that it not be punitive at all. If this tax works as designed, not one penny is collected by the city of Sitka. If a business is shut for X amount of days or months per year, they would be levied a tax, but that doesn't mean the space couldn't be used, leased out in the wintertime. A small business could do a pop-up for a month and try to sell their wares and be a business generator. And I came at this because my wife and I were granted such an opportunity by a local business owner. in the old Bayview building when the Work and Rugged Gear store had moved out. It was vacant for a year, and it was a busy cruise ship day. And I realized that that empty window did not look good for the city of Sitka, did not look good for the business owners next door. And boy, did we need a break. We were on the ropes. And going into that building and finding the owner, they offered us a pop-up store. And I think they'd be okay with me saying, all they asked for was 10% of our sales. And we were able to get started that summer, 10 years ago, with a storefront, and it saved our business. Without that opportunity, my business would have been bankrupt 10 years ago. And I see that as an opportunity we can provide for other people starting businesses in this community. That was the impetus for starting this idea of a vacancy tax. So it doesn't have to be punitive. It can be really, really helpful to the growth of our community, and people don't have to pay the tax if they're willing to lease out that space to others to work in it in the wintertime. Lastly, regional strategies. Really, with this one, the task force kind of pushed this one to the back because it was kind of low on our priority list, and we didn't do a whole lot of work on the regional strategies. And so we had some information about it, but ultimately the recommendations are, as you I'm sure know, to continue engaging with the regional initiatives with other cities that are working on this, and professional associates and industry groups, and enhancing our engagement with these groups by establishing a dedicated tourism position in the city of Sitka. That would really help. If we have that position, they can work with all of these items, but especially on regional strategies, to have somebody devoted to be able to what's happening in Juneau, what's happening in Ketchikan, and how can we work together and come to something that works for all the communities, especially with MOUs and with what we want to do as far as allowing ships into town on what days. Juneau has been working on having a July 4th, have town free of ships on July 4th, and communicating with a full-time dedicated tourism position would really be able to help us do something like that and maybe work with the other communities. And with that, I think I'd like to open it up to questions. Thank you for your time. Okay. Great.
Jim, thank you for the report, and thank you and all the other commission members for the work. I know when we tasked this commission with this, that we gave you an essentially impossible goal with an impossible timeline. So every meeting that you had to do over the last little bit, all the input you took, all the reporting out that you did, we are very thankful for, because this is a document which we can take and it can guide our actions forward in developing tourism into a manageable beast that the majority of the town can support. So I really do thank you for your time, and I thank all the commission members for their time as well. It was quite a tasking. I'm sure everybody's glad that it's over. But the good news is, if we follow the recommendations, a tourism commission will pop up. It'll need a chair. It'll need other people on it. So some people in the room have experience already. Questions from the assembly for the chair or any other board members that might be here?
Sorry, I'm not having luck with my microphone. I don't have any questions yet, but I just wanted to emphasize what the mayor said. I really appreciate the time and effort. I know we just set it up and then you just went for it. And I would imagine, because of the sensitivity of it, that it was very challenging to try to get everyone's opinions and try to find that middle way that you're talking about, which I do appreciate. And I'm pleased with the report. So I just wanted to say thank you for now.
You're welcome, Tor. You grabbed his microphone.
Oh.
Anybody else?
I guess for me, just a big thank you to all the task force members. I know you all put in a lot of time, a lot of evenings into this, and I'm sure a lot of time during the day as well to put all your documents together. And thank you, Jim, for stepping up into the chair role. I know when Phyllis had to resign, no one really wanted it, but you did a great job. And just thank you so much. And then Amy, you killed it. You did amazing. I know you put in a ton of effort on this, and thank you so much because it came out really well. I'm really pleased.
I learned a lesson about civics. Don't go on a work trip when there's a vacancy for a. All right, thank you.
Because that is how it worked out. I think they were able to achieve so much in a year because they divided up into groups and they were organized and they kept at it. They met independently. We tossed around the idea of, oh, you're busy, don't meet over the summer. They did. They showed up, they kept at it, they did it all. And we have these 32 findings that are very actionable because of that. A diligent group that cares about this town. And that was what unified kind of your seemingly disparate or wide range of opinions into this document that we really can do quick things and get those long lead items updated and put into place within months to see some outcomes for this town. And over the course of this year, the understanding that this is like management, tourism management, and how that topic, that phrase came out a lot more, as opposed to the initial thought of we need to limit. A cap is the only answer. By looking at these wide-ranging challenges and finding, you put the training wheels on the bicycle before you just go off down the hill. You put the bumpers before you learn to bowl. There are steps along the process of learning how to come to these skills and these understandings for a town. So that's what I learned through being liaison to this process. And it was very rewarding to see the town come together to achieve this in the year's time frame that we gave them. So thank you. I learned a lot, and I enjoyed my time with the task force.
Our pleasure. Thank you. And just lastly, unless there's another question, of course, I'll stick around. But I think I neglected to really mention about all the members that were on the task force. What I saw was a group of people in town, as JJ mentioned, love this community. And I was happy, like it being in a good juror room, and I've been in there before too, when people really were working for the good of the task, to define, to do what we were defined to do. And I didn't see agendas. I know the people in town will talk about that everything swung too far to the left or too far to the right, but I really felt I saw a group of people working earnestly to try to come to consensus and do what they felt was best for the community without agenda. So that was nice to have seen. Thank you.
And I'll just echo on with that. When I was appointed, tourism was a big issue into the assembly. I mean, and people kept coming forward with concerns. And when the idea of putting a task force together came forward, the thing that I was hoping for was a Sitka-wide solution. And that's what I see come out of this. I mean, shining through this report really is a desire on the part of everyone in Sitka to come to an answer on this. And it doesn't have to look like anybody else's model. It's our model. And I like to see that, as you say, I don't see any desire to shift, to not try and deal with the problems in front of us and try to come up with some real solutions that fit us as a community. So thank you for all that effort.
And Jim, thank you again. It is kind of a natural pause point between the presentation and our discussion. So it's a little bit early, but let's take a brief recess and then we'll come back and have a discussion about the recommendations. Well, thank you everybody for that brief recess there. So the next item on our agenda tonight, item B, is a discussion direction decision on the Tourism Task Force recommendations and next steps. So tonight, Assembly, of course, this process is up to us. However, my thought or a discussion on accepting the Tourism Task Force recommendations. There is a potential motion in your packet if you desire, and that does involve getting an action plan back from the administrator, and then, of course, public comment after a motion is made, and a deliberation on that motion. So, does anybody have any discussion on the task force recommendation and next steps?
I was just gonna say, I'm looking at this motion we kind of, or you guys, or whoever put together. I'm wondering if the second meeting in June is a little tight. I know it may seem like a bit away, but we're basically mid-May now, and so it's basically just a little shy over a month from now. So I just wonder if we should give them a little more time. But I don't know if anybody shares that.
I can answer to that. I did work with John on that scheduling part because I had the same concern, and that is a reasonable time frame for them to come back with. It's not going to be a massive action plan, but it'll give some opportunity of where the priorities would lie. We could then recategorize priorities if we want. But June 2nd, or the second meeting in June, has been affirmed as a reasonable date for that.
Okay, perfect. And that helps clarify. It's not 100% fleshed out with every little detail. It's some basics for us to look over.
Correct. Basically prioritizing from a staff's perspective, and then what staff can actually handle, because there are some items on there that it would be within the Assembly's purview to handle, and Assembly members can then grab onto those and run with those. So
Okay.
that's kind of what I'm seeing at that June 2nd meeting.
Thank you. And then as far as the task force recommendations, I think they're very well written, and obviously we would have, as we get deeper into it, we'd have to flesh out each idea individually. But I'm pleased with the product, and as I said before, appreciate all the work they put into it. So I like this as written. I'd be interested to see what other members think.
JJ?
Just a little bit of heads up, as me and Chris as sponsor and co-sponsor for the original task force and liaisons through this process, we are looking at and picking up for Assembly Action, creating that tourism commission. We were hoping to be a little further along the process by now. It's just kind of fine tuning the duties portion of things, take some finessing. This, 9 of the packet kind of list out a calendar, but we're trying to future-proof this as much as possible and make sure that language in the code section is as specific but also as broad as we need. So one piece that Assembly members are picking up is that commission.
Chris?
I guess I'll put it into this section of the evening is being a liaison to this group. Something that I heard a lot of during the process was it was hard for them to make some of the choices that they needed to make, some of the recommendations, because of a lack of data. They were making assumptions off the best data that we had available. But I think some of their harder choices, which, come down to us here maybe eventually, is we are going to probably want some more data. So I think we should keep that in mind of, we might need to have a little more research done and potentially have to find some funding for it. It came up a few times, and I think it would do us all a service if we did try to think about that and find some funding.
I can agree with that. And I think that's where our tourism manager, as of July 1st, it looks like it's going to be in the budget. And I think that would be very opportune at that point. Because I even wrote the TBMP should fall under a tourism manager as well in order to work that out. So I think that is a key hire as well as this tourism commission for that person to work with the commission. Hopefully they can all get started about the same time. I'm sure there's tons of optimism about this manager, and everyone's going to try and put their hand in for that position. So we'll hire that one fast, and then we can get a commission going and around the same time there. And it's been a little while since this issue has been talked about, but myself and John, I say myself, it was mostly John. We have been working on an MOU with the cruise lines in the past. One was fairly close to potentially coming forward. That work was halted so that the tourism task force could do their work because I don't think it was proper for other things to be going on at the same time. But I think that can be jump started again fairly quickly. I doubt perspectives have changed from the cruise lines. So that is something that could potentially come back relatively quickly. So I can talk with John about that one and see where we're at, since we did have some forward progress in the past on that one. And then I'm also interested in looking at lightering limits and seeing how the municipality can help flatten those peak days on that. I very publicly stated that I apologized for the 9,500 person day because that was a boat that we tied up, that we lightered. So that wasn't on the dock at that point. And it was unexpected. It happened kind of last minute, but that is something we can control. And that is an action that we can take as an assembly to make this more manageable as we go forward. So I will be looking into that one as well. I'm not sure if that's an ordinance or what comes forward. If it is, I would reach out for some co-sponsors there.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you a question about that, actually?
Of course.
Glad you brought it up. I was thinking, as I was reading the report, and then when James was giving his report as well, is that if we do MOU, we would have to be with pretty much most or all of the cruise lines somehow, I would imagine. I've never done one before, but so that there's some sort of cohesive plan. That was just a thought.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good. And then the owners of the McGraw HPR dock has mentioned before previously that they were considering doing an MOU with I think it was either the city or the cruise lines themselves to kind of help. Has that been explored, or what's the status of that?
So I hate to speak for Chris himself, but in conversations with him, my understanding is he will only dock one large Panamax style boat and then one, I'll call it Holland America size boat at the same time. And that's in order to get that about 6,000 people per day at his facility. My other understanding is in order to kind of ease the traffic flow right away and the big spikes, that two boats aren't allowed to tie up at the same time, that they do have to be staggered from the arrival of one. You can't have one arriving within 30 minutes and I don't know what that number is, but it's my understanding that there's a gap in between them so that people more evenly are dispersed amongst the attractions in town, as opposed to 6,000 people all trying to get on a bus at the same time.
Okay, thank you. And that would definitely be worth, I think, just checking in. I believe that is a correct statement. I think he's may have said that before in the past, but it would just be nice to know more officially if he has made that commitment or what have you, other than thus saying that we believe he has. It would be nice to get more of a firmer understanding of.
Yeah, I can follow up with that. But if you look at the cruise schedule, it appears for the most part It also appears that Saturdays are essentially empty of large cruise ships. There's a couple of them, but for the most part, Saturdays are ship free right now.
Yeah, and I have noticed, I work downtown, I've noticed the streets don't feel as overwhelmed. Seems like more of a steady, slow thing. I haven't like clocked it every day, but as you have a store as well, I would imagine you've probably noticed that as well. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think what I've noticed from this plan is it's pretty comprehensive. I mean, it covers all the things, even what you're talking about here, right? So MOU would not just be with the cruise industry, but it would also be an understanding with the Sitka dock facility, right? Like, I mean, these are all the MOUs we could be talking about. I really liked the full thing. The zoning, I think, has a huge impact on that too, to help us maintain control over, or give at least everybody a chance to talk about any future impacts. I mean, I like the plan as we see it. There's a huge amount of stuff in there, and a lot of work. And I think, this is fairly comprehensive. I couldn't think of anything that isn't in here that they didn't try to cover, that is going to help us as a community do a better job of managing tourism. And I think it also gives us the flexibility for, Alaska is known for boom and bust, right? So, if this is something that doesn't, if this changes and the cruise ships go somewhere else at some point, we also have flexibility to move forward in a different way. So I like what I see on this whole thing. So, but yeah, I mean, the amount of work in this thing is, massive.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
Further discussion from the assembly, potential motion if the assembly is ready to accept. John, please.
Just throw out another point to consider. Negotiated agreement with CLIA or the individual lines is sometimes very challenging to get all the lines to sign off on. Given our circumstance here, it may be a consideration to develop our MOU with the private dock owner, who has the ability to do his own scheduling at his facility, and then use of our own facility, our lightering facility, I think can be controlled without an MOU, since again, we do have control of the city facilities. So perhaps just a negotiated agreement with the dock owner might be the path of least resistance if we head down that route.
What I'm hearing is Saturdays are going to be the only day that you're going to be able to control lightering. Because if the big boat can't tie up out at the cruise dock, and then they're going to schedule to come in on Saturday, and then you regulate lightering on Saturdays only. I'm just saying the heebie-jeebies are coming already, as far as with the home rule, and then only Saturdays being the day that you could exercise home rule by limiting huge disembarkees. And then the rest of the week, it's going to be 6,200 at a private facility. And if you're not in at the private facility, if with your cruise ship, I don't know how you're going to get them to sign a memorandum of understanding if they can't come to town on any day except Saturday and drop the pick and then lighter people in.
So if no one has anything, I'm ready to make a motion. Okay. I move to accept the Tourism Task Force recommendations and direct the municipal administrator to develop an action plan to be brought back to the assembly no later than the second meeting in June.
Second.
Just as a clerical point, Kevin, it was recommended to remove on our paper that we just got from Amy tonight. It was recommended to remove and replace. Would that be part of your motion? Or are you accepting it as original?
No, I'd like to make it as Because we just got this piece of paper from Amy this morning or this afternoon. So as I guess
You can just say as amended, the recommendations as amended.
okay, I move to accept the Tourism Task Force recommendations as amended and direct the municipal administrator to develop an action plan to be brought back to the assembly no later than the second meeting in June.
Second.
Thank you for that one. It's been moved and seconded to accept the Tourism Task Force recommendations as recommended. Is there any public comment?
I'm Larry Edwards. If tonight you decide to accept or adopt the task force recommendations, I ask that the motion set aside the section on Directive 1 level of cruise ship tourism. I ask this as one who has attended all task force events, all formal meetings, and nearly all of the work sessions. Deliberations were conducted through 14 work sessions and only 2 regular meetings. Please note, though, that on page 5 of the packet, July 12 was in fact a work session and not a regular session. I've got the receipts on that. The problem is at the work sessions, public comment was banned. Yet this was a body with a dramatically biased composition, including built-in conflicts of interest. The dynamic of such a body on a year-long assignment, and understandably it lacks all-knowing onboard expertise, simply led the Directive 1 results astray in the absence of public comment. 2 other things compounded that problem. At the start, the task force unwisely decided to set aside work on Directive 1 until the last moment. Months later, last fall, the body took up Directive 1 in a panic. Then it dropped the work only to take it up again in a panic, and drop it until the final moment. Directive 1 is the most important of the 5 directives, yet the body never set up a committee for it. There should have been an active Directive 1 committee the whole time. The other compounding factor is the questions related to Directive 1 that the task force asked the public in surveys and open houses. They were poorly conceived in haste. Many were quite biased. The body did, at its final meeting, broadly acknowledge the data's unreliability. Even so, the task force presents to you these Directive 1 recommendations. Because of all the problems, they were not well considered, not well deliberated, and for the most part lack a foundation of reliable data. Put simply, the dog ate the task force Directive 1 homework. The body should have admitted that and should not have included Directive 1 in its report to you. To express these facts saddens me greatly, but that's where the Directive 1 process, such as it was, has led. I acknowledge the members' time and effort and their much better work on the other directives. I thank them for their service. Please, Assembly, set aside Directive 1 through an amendment. Thank you.
My name is Leah Mason, and I very much appreciate the work of the task force. It was a lot of time. It was volunteer time, and I would be very interested to see where further volunteers are going to come from on a permanent commission. I would like to say, though, that I appreciate Amy coming forward with the data. The data was garbage, and I really want to see that admitted. And that in order to do better by the community, the city is going to have to devote serious attention to developing better data. And that is going to take money, and that is money that is not going to something else. It's opportunity costs. It's Amy's time not doing an RFP for a community garden, or for something else important like affordable housing, because she is directing her considerable capacity, but very much overstretched, to doing something like this for the benefit of several businesses, and the idea that there's a sales tax relationship and that this is something that is sustainable over time. So my main point with that is that while the data and the error has not been included in the recommendations, it was certainly included in the information that was given to the public, and the feedback that we got from that is very much compromised on that basis. And I would like that to be considered. There was very little of the town, and an average of diverse opinions is not a middle ground worth saluting. So I am going to say that I agree with what Larry has said, that to make a binding or unbinding or even any kind of decision based on the garbage data and the laziness of choosing not to work in a categorical and logical way with information as a matter of course is something that I would like to see some attention focused on. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Austin Cranford. I would also like to thank the committee for their volunteer time on this issue. I did have two things that were brought up during his presentation. We'll start with the least concerning one, I guess, which was the jaywalking. He mentioned that the city does not have a law against jaywalking, but the state actually has an administrative code, specifically Section 13 of the Alaska Administrative Code 02.160, crossing at other than crosswalks, specifically states in paragraph B that no pedestrian may cross a roadway at a point where a pedestrian tunnel or overhead pedestrian crossing has been provided and which is accessible at road level at or near the point of crossing. If a pedestrian overpass or tunnel is not accessible, and if no marked crosswalk is provided, a pedestrian crossing the roadway must yield the right of way to all vehicles on the roadway which are close as to constitute a hazard. So the city should definitely look into people crossing out here in front of Centennial Hall and other areas, because there is state code that is a part of that. Regarding the data itself, there was a mention that there isn't enough information for the data downtown. I simply disagree. Data was put in here. We can argue back and forth about the validity of that data, but the city does have data. We do simulations at events down south of how many people can be in a block. We have fire marshal codes here in town that specify exactly how many people can be within buildings. If you combine the simulation data with the fire marshal codes, you can find out exactly how many people can be downtown within safe limits. Should that be the limit of the town? Absolutely not, but this is definitely something that can be looked into to get concrete data. Thank you.
Good evening, Barbara Bingham. I just want to say that I also agree with Larry's comments and Leah's as well. And we have recognized, and thank you, Chris, for bringing that up to the need for reliable data. And we really should have that first before we make any decisions. And Tim also mentioned the fact that, given the fact this could be a boom and bust, I very much believe, given there's significant evidence that the cruise ship industry itself is not going to be sustainable for a very long time. We keep thinking of years down the road and, we'll get this done by 2026 and then we'll keep working on it. We may not have very long at all. We need to have really balance our economic interests in a way that will sustain the community without the major cruise tourism. And one of the things I did just want to, these were some comments that I made at one of our task force meetings. kind of related to this. Conclusions in our findings speak to the fact that people are clearly concerned with maintaining the local quality and character of our community, preserving the natural environment, fostering social justice and cohesion in our health and safety. So these comments came through loud and clear, and we really did not have to rely on sales tax data or other quantitative data to get these conclusions from people. While a clear majority realized that we enjoy economic benefit from tourism industry as a whole, almost 2/3 of respondents in the December 7th town hall agreed that economic benefit, disagreed that economic benefit should be the most important factor in determining right levels of cruise tourism. It was also noted that it's been noted numerous times that we're very polarized on the subject. But my reading of the data, looking through the results from the town halls and the survey, really seemed like we're pretty evenly, the opinion is pretty evenly balanced across the spectrum. And of course, again, we have the caveat that a lot of the data we got is not reliable. So the most important thing is to have our data in hand before we make any decisions and any long-term agreements. And we really need to, I would like to see in any data that we gather, a major environmental impact component. That is something that the task force didn't discuss, probably outside our purview. It is the most important thing that we can consider right now. Thank you.
Anyone else on the motion to accept the task force recommendations?
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Assembly members. Rachel Roy. I was able to serve part of the year on the task force, and it really was a really good experience. Kind of didn't know what to expect of it, but I think we all got a little closer to each other and understanding and compromises and good conversations. So the one thing I wanted to just give an update about is in the section 15, 16, 17 with the recommendations around bikes and e-bikes. The Visit Sitka kind of saw that this and heard all the different comments around biking and e-bike use. And we took that initiative to create a collateral piece that helps to inform and educate bike users on the rules of the road, what side of the road you should be on, how do you share a path when you're on a multi-use trail, and also recommended routes and trails that where should you be biking, where you should avoid biking or bike with caution, and then park at the trailhead and hike and not bike. So that we have a draft, and I was wishing I had copies today because that would have been we just got our draft, and we're looking for stakeholder feedback, working with the both the Sitka Trail Works, the bike committees, the businesses that have bike rentals, so that it can really be a piece that can help try to help mitigate some of that through education of renters. And also I think it can be used for anyone that's using or renting a bike in town. And so we'll continue to work on that. And it's also something that any of our collateral pieces we budget to plan for a revision. So it can be tested this summer. How did it work? What needs to change? What could be improved? And it can really be a tool for that. I just wanted to include that in, because I know there's some recommendations, but know that there is some action happening that might be able to help inform and really get down to that number 16 of this worked, this path should be avoided, and kind of giving that recommended route for users when they are using our community. Thank you.
Anyone else on the motion? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to assembly for deliberation. Further deliberation on accepting the tourism task force recommendations? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to accept the recommendations, and those recommendations is amended by the Planning and Community Development Director, and then directing the municipal administrator to develop an action plan to be brought back to the assembly no later than the second meeting in June. Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
and Mr. Pike.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. That concludes the assembly's business tonight. That'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the assembly, Jim Mitchner, citizen. Just want to bring something to you. I've had discussions with Mr. Leach before this and Mr. Hanson, and I'm finally ready to kind of bring it to the big public. I've been working on something for the last year that involves working on changing federal regulations on the CFR, the federal codes on how CPV money can be spent. I've had an in-person meeting with Senator Sullivan. I've had a private discussion with a representative from CLIA about this. And it would be a way for the city of Sitka and all municipalities in the nation where cruise ships tie up to be able to use CPV funds for a much wider use. It's got an initial nod from the senator that he likes the idea. The CLIA representative thinks that CLIA likes the idea, and it's a long game. It would happen to be, several years down the road. But at some time, if people have questions, I'd like you to come to me and ask about it. Mr. Leach obviously was very forthright in saying he can't really even discuss the subject with me unless he has direction from you. And so I pitched the idea, and Brian and John listened, but they couldn't really say anything or be actionable about it because they're relying on you to give them that direction. What would really be helpful is if the city of Sitka could go to the delegation in DC and support this idea of changing federal regulations to be able to use our CPV funds in a much wider way. So like I said, I've already met with the senator, and I met with CLIA about this, and I'm in talk with some of the senator's aides. And I think it would really help our community be able to use money that's brought in by the industry for uses that really benefit us as a community year round. And I'm happy to hear that it's getting at least a tentative yes from both sides of the issue, the legislative side and from the industry side. So if there's any questions about that, please contact me. And I would love it if we could go to DC and have the delegation get pushed on this from the city level, not just some dude in Sitka. Thank you.
Anybody else this evening on or off the agenda?
My name is Leah Mason, and I worked a lot on mineral resources in Australia. And while I was there, one of the things that we suggested was a sovereign wealth fund, because Australia practically pays people to take its mineral wealth away with a government which is sadly reliant on royalties. And it unfortunately makes them a little bit way too close to the interests of the people who are there to benefit shareholders, not the community of, or the Commonwealth of Australia. So in respect of what Jim has put forward, I would recommend that, taking into account the boom and bust cycle, that any funds that come through should in some sense there should be something squirreled away to account for what happens when the bust comes, and to be delivering some kind of benefit for many longer years. Thank you.
Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening? Seeing none, that'll bring us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Assembly. We are adjourned.